There has been a lot of talk recently about racing mogul Michael Andretti bringing an 11th team onto the F1 grid. Andretti Autosport have participated in Formula E, Indy Car, Extreme E and RallyCross, as well as many other racing series. Everywhere this team goes, they bring victories. His $200 million bid to join Formula 1 is the real deal, and today we're going to get you filled in on the details of the deal and what the F1 team bosses think of it. Formula 1 may be entering a new golden age. The sport is growing at a frankly unbelievable rate. The 2021 season finale in Abu Dhabi drew 108.7 million viewers, 29% more than the same race in 2020, and the highest viewing figures for a race during the season. A big part of this has been Netflix's Drive to Survive, which has opened the sport to a younger audience in territories such as the United States, where it previously had struggled against big domestic competitions such as NASCAR and Indy Car. Thanks to the behind-the-scenes docuseries, there is a whole host of fans who are new to the sport and ready to throw their hat to whichever team is the most relatable to them. The Haas Formula 1 team is owned by American Gene Haas, but with the team actually based in Maranello in Italy, in a factory adjacent to the Ferrari F1 teams, they've avoided leaning into their American roots too much. The 2021 Formula 1 season reached an average of 934,000 viewers per race on US network ESPN, an increase of 54% compared to 2020, with Haas apparently reluctant to make the most of nearly 1 million fans eager to express their patriotism in the sport. It's no surprise that an American racing team has decided to step up to the plate and ask for a shot in motor racing's biggest series. Formula 1 is the pinnacle of motor racing, something Andretti Autosport's owner's father, Mario Andretti, knows better than many people. He raced for Lotus, Ferrari and Alfa Romeo, among other teams throughout the 70s and early 80s. In 1978, he even won the F1 Drivers' World Championship while driving the iconic John Player branded Black Lotus car. The team is currently owned by Michael Andretti, who's also a decorated racing driver and spent a season in F1 racing for McLaren in 1993. It is Michael who's bringing the bid to enter into Formula 1, increasing the current number of teams to 11. The advantages of having an American-owned F1 team are clear. The United States is a massive market to be exploited by Formula 1. Current estimates have the population at over 334 million people. That's about the same as the population of Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Australia, Italy, Spain, Monaco, Azerbaijan, the UK, Austria, France, Hungary, Belgium, and the Netherlands added together. Those countries account for 14 of the races this season. So yeah, that's a lot of potential fans. Of course, it isn't just about the fans. The US is home to some of the richest companies in the world, all of whom would be very interested in spending millions and millions of dollars on advertising in F1 if there was a large enough American following. With an American team to get behind, it's hard to argue against the fan base growing. Just because something sounds like a good idea, though, doesn't mean it is. There is an almost endless list of F1 teams who've bought their way into F1 and failed within the first few years. Caterham and HRT are two recent examples that come to mind. When a new F1 team joins the grid, the prize pool for the rest of the grid is diluted. Teams like Caterham and HRT brought almost nothing to the sport in their short time there. What they did do, though, was take money away from other teams. To avoid this happening again in the future, the Concord Agreement, signed by all the current constructors in 2020, set out an entry fee of $200 million to be split among the teams. This means that any team intending to join has the correct financial backing to be able to compete in the sport and to compensate the current teams for the money they lose by having to share with a new team. Even with the compensation that Andretti will be paying to the teams, many owners still don't want to give up their share of the kitty. The new budget cap is designed to make teams profitable instead of endless money sinks. The numbers decided on, currently $140 million, were calculated with any earnings from F1 being split between 10 teams, not 11. So Andretti has to bring value to the sport as a whole, and at the moment, many people aren't convinced he will. Speaking about his bid, Andretti said, "There are millions of people embracing it, it's just not the right people at the moment." So who are the right people? Well, the FIA makes the final decision, but without the backing of the current teams, it's almost impossible for any application to be approved. Zach Brown is one of the few people who've come out in support of Andretti so far. The Andretti name has a huge history in Formula 1 and in various motorsports, and I think would add a lot of value, said McLaren boss Zach Brown. A very credible racing team with a credible brand, with the right resources, I think is additive to the sport. Zach co-owns the Walkinshaw Andretti United team in supercars though, which probably makes him a little biased. The only other voice speaking in Andretti's favour at the moment is that of Alpine CEO Laurent Rossi. I've talked to Michael. It goes along with the expansion in the US, and I think it would contribute to the show. An American team would directly generate interest in the US and therefore revenue. Then we need to demonstrate that it's enough to compensate for the dilution that Toto was mentioning. Gut feeling? I think it would. But let's do the job properly and we'll see. Again, Alpine have something to gain. Their parent company Renault will be supplying the engines to Andretti. How much that will be worth to Renault is hard to know, but it'll be well into the millions of dollars. So what about the people who won't be directly profiting from the Andretti team? As the owner of one of the biggest Formula One teams, Toto Wolff has had his fair share to say on the matter. We've had 10 entries today. We divide the prize fund among those 10 entries. We have invested considerable amounts over the last 10 years. Each of the organizations sitting here in the press conference has probably put in more than $1 billion into Formula One projects over the years, so it needs to be accretive. If a team comes in, how can you demonstrate that you're bringing in more money than it's actually costing? Because the 11th team means a 10% dilution for everybody else. Wolff doesn't exactly sound convinced, does he? All Andretti can do is speculate at how much money his team might bring in. He is likely to claim that an American F1 team will bring bigger audiences, and he's probably right. But how could he ever prove that? It is impossible for him to say that his team will bring X% of growth to viewing numbers each year. Horner felt that the $200 million fee put a minimum value on any entrant, but stressed the importance of looking at the long-term picture. It's the first time in memory that we've got 10 healthy franchises. The $200 million is a significant amount of money, but in this business, when you divide it by the participants, it doesn't go a long way, and it's a one-shot. It's not $200 million every year. So, at the end of the day, a conversation like this will always come down to economics. $200 million between the 10 teams is $20 million each. That isn't even 15% of a team's yearly budget this year. Imagine your employer said that they were going to reduce your salary by 10% in exchange for a one-off bonus equaling 15% of your old salary. You'd walk out the door and never look back. Obviously, no one wants that happening in F1. Haas team principal Gunther Steiner has perhaps been the most outspoken against the idea so far. That is to be expected from the bluntly spoken Italian, but he still makes some good points. As businesses, I think, first of all, we've got in the moment 10 stable teams, which for a long time was not possible in F1 or was not happening in F1. Now for 5 years, everything is pretty stable. Very good. And why would the 10 teams say we will dilute our value to bring somebody new in? You know, what's in it for us? We've been here a long time. So I mean, if FOM wants to distribute more money or something, that is another discussion. But just to have more teams, more doesn't mean being better. More than anyone else on the grid, his team knows what it means to be running in tight financially. For years, they drove at the back of the grid due to having a much smaller budget than anyone else. Now that the budget caps are starting to have an effect, his team is finally able to be competitive again. Dilution of his share of F1 money, though, may take millions of dollars from the team's budget and see Haas relegated to the back of the grid once again. If the Andretti project is to take off, it needs to be able to show, with reasonable confidence, that it will be able to replace the money the current teams will be losing by including it in the championship. How he does that is a question for someone with far more knowledge of international marketing and experience in accounting for billion-dollar companies than we have. If, and it is a big if, Andretti can answer that question, then the inclusion of Andretti Autosport on the F1 grid might happen as early as 2025. With the pedigree they have as a racing team, it might not be too long after that until they're able to challenge the biggest names in Formula One. Do you want to see another team on the F1 grid? Let us know in the comment section down below. Until we see you next time, drive safe and bye-bye.